At my dad's birthday, my sister laughed at me for coming empty-handed, then I slid an envelope and whole room went silent. The rain had stopped an hour before I arrived, leaving the asphalt slick under the dim glow of the street lamps. I parked at the far end of the lot, away from the cluster of cars with shiny bows and fresh washes, the sort of presentation people make when they want to be noticed. The banquet hall loomed ahead, all bright lights and muffled chatter, every laugh and clink of silverware faint but sharp enough to feel through the glass doors. Inside, the air was thick with that mixture of too much perfume and the savory haze from catered trays. The kind of smell that felt expensive but also suffocating if you stayed in it too long. I slipped through the entryway without announcing myself. No coat to hang, no wrapped box under my arm, just my jacket zipped halfway and my hands empty. It didn't take long for her to see me. My sister, hair styled like she was about to walk into a magazine shoot, the kind of smile that could slice skin if it ever reached her eyes. She was standing near the main table, one hand wrapped around the back of Dad's chair as if she owned the whole night. Her gaze tracked me instantly. Wow, her voice carried across the room before I could even take a seat. Couldn't even bring a gift? Guess some of us just can't afford it. She tilted her head in mock sympathy, making sure the table heard every word. The cousins laughed. Not because it was particularly funny, but because it was easier to laugh with her than to risk being her target. Even Dad gave a small shake of his head, the kind that said I expected more from you. I didn't reply. My chair scraped softly as I slid into it. No fuss. No attempt at explanation. The food was already being served in heavy white dishes, steam curling from roasted vegetables, butter pooling at the edges of baked rolls. I ate, listening more than speaking, letting the conversations flow around me. My sister's voice kept rising over the rest, drawing attention like a spotlight. She talked about her promotion, her new SUV, the resort she'd booked for summer. Every detail slipped out in perfect order, designed to reinforce the picture she wanted everyone to see. I let it wash over me, taking my time, cutting into the main course without glancing in her direction. The room was warm, too warm, the kind of heat that makes you slow down just to avoid breaking a sweat. When the plates were cleared and the chatter shifted into that restless lull before dessert, the hall staff began bringing out the cake. 3 tiers, frosted with elaborate swirls, the words Happy 60th, Dad piped in gold lettering across the middle. Cameras were lifted, phones aimed. Everyone stood or leaned in to get the perfect shot. I stayed seated until the singing ended, then rose without rush. My hand slid into my jacket pocket, pulling out a plain white envelope, no ribbon, no name scrawled across it, no flourish to hint at what it contained. I placed it on the table in front of Dad. He looked at it with mild curiosity, maybe expecting a card, maybe nothing at all. He tore the flap open, slow enough that the room barely noticed. Then he saw the first sheet inside, and his hand stilled. His brow creased, mouth parting just slightly. He read the words once, then again. His lips moved like he was checking each letter against what he thought he knew. By the time he pulled out the second page, the deed itself, the conversation around us had gone quiet. His chair scraped back. "You bought this for me?" His voice wasn't loud, but it carried, maybe because no one else was speaking. His fingers gripped the paper like it might vanish if he blinked too long. I nodded. "Happy birthday, Dad." For a moment, nothing moved. Even the candles on the cake seemed to hold their flicker in the stillness. My sister's smile, so constant all evening, fell away in one sharp motion, like a mask dropping off mid-scene. The cabin had been his dream for decades, the one place he'd always talked about but never had the means to claim. I'd found it 6 months ago, rundown but in the right location. The renovations were quiet, the purchase handled under his name without a hint of my involvement. Paid in full. No loans. No strings. He reached for me, his eyes glassy. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," I told him. The room stayed silent, the weight of the moment pressing down heavier than the smell of the food. Even the cousins who'd laughed earlier kept their heads lowered, pretending to check their phones. Sometimes the best gifts don't need wrapping paper. Sometimes they need time and patience. And tonight, Patience was the sharpest thing I'd brought into the room. The quiet didn't last. It never does. By the time Dad had folded the deed and slipped it back into the envelope, my sister had recovered enough to speak again. Her voice was lighter now, almost airy, but the edge beneath it was impossible to miss. "That's quite a surprise," she said, looking at me as though she could peel the answer straight out of my skull. I didn't respond. She turned her attention to Dad. "So, when exactly did you decide to get a vacation place? I thought we were going to talk about big purchases like that as a family." Dad blinked at her, still caught between disbelief and awe. "I didn't decide. I didn't buy it. It's mine," but he glanced toward me. "Your brother handled everything." That drew every pair of eyes back to me. I stayed in my seat, letting the weight of their curiosity settle. "How long have you been planning this?" one of the cousins asked, as if I owed them an explanation. "Long enough," I said. It was the only answer they were going to get tonight. Dessert plates appeared, the cake sliced with neat precision by the catering staff. But the sweetness on the plates couldn't cut through the bitterness building in the room. My sister kept smiling for the sake of appearances, but her eyes kept drifting toward Dad's jacket pocket where the envelope now rested. When the night wrapped up, people filtered toward the doors in clusters. The usual chatter of goodbyes was absent around me. My sister approached Dad for a hug that lasted a beat too long, whispering something I couldn't hear. Her heels clicked away before I could decide whether to care. Dad walked out beside me, the cool night air washing away the thick scent of the hall. "I don't know what to say," he said again, his voice lower this time. "That cabin, I thought it was gone years ago." "It was," I told him. "Took work to get it back." He stopped walking, looking at me like he wanted to ask why I'd done it. But he didn't. Maybe he already knew. The drive home was quiet. My phone lit up 3 times with my sister's name, but I let it ring each time. By the next morning, the silence had broken wide open. I woke to a stream of messages, some from cousins, a few from uncles I hadn't spoken to in years. All variations of the same thing. "What was that about last night? Why didn't you tell anyone? Did you win the lottery or something?" Buried in the middle was one from my sister. Short. "We need to talk. Now." I ignored it. I had no intention of giving her the upper hand in whatever game she thought she was starting. Around noon, Dad called. She came by, he said without preamble. Asked a lot of questions about the cabin. Said she thought it was too much for me to handle alone. "She means too much for me to give you," I replied. He sighed. "I just don't want this to turn into some family problem." "It already was," I said. That afternoon, I drove out to the cabin. The renovations were done, the place smelling faintly of fresh wood and new paint. Light poured in through the windows, landing across the polished floors. The air out there was cooler, cleaner, a sharp contrast to the city's stale weight. It was exactly how Dad had described wanting it years ago. 2 bedrooms, a wide porch, a fireplace that could warm the whole place in winter. The furniture was simple but solid, no clutter, nothing unnecessary. It wasn't just a property. It was a space meant for breathing. I walked through each room, checking the details. My sister had no claim here, no say, no influence. And that was exactly the problem for her. By evening, another message came through from her. "This one wasn't a request. You can ignore me all you want, but Dad's not the only one who's going to find out what you're really doing." The words didn't bother me. What bothered me was the assumption she knew what I was doing at all. 2 days later, Dad invited me to dinner at his house. He said my sister would be there, but only to keep the peace. That was his phrase. I went anyway. The meal was quiet at first. Too quiet. My sister finally broke it halfway through, setting her fork down with deliberate care. "I just want to understand," she began. "You've been distant for months. And now suddenly, you show up with this big gesture? Why now? Why not years ago?" "Because it wasn't ready years ago," I said. She tilted her head, studying me like she could pick apart the answer. "Or maybe you were just waiting for the right audience." Dad frowned. "Enough. He did something generous. Can't we leave it at that?" She smiled thinly. "Sure. If generosity is the only reason." The rest of the night was stiff. She left before dessert, brushing past me without a word. Later that week, I learned she'd been making calls to Dad's friends, to extended family, even to the real estate office I'd worked with, fishing for something she could use. That was when I knew this wasn't going to fade. She wasn't going to let it go. She'd already RSVP'd to a fight she didn't even know the terms of yet. And I was more than willing to set the table. The calls kept coming. Not from her directly, she was smarter than that, but from people who suddenly just wanted to check in. Old family friends, distant cousins, even a neighbor from our childhood street I hadn't spoken to in years. The questions were wrapped in small talk, but the center was always the same. What's the story with the cabin? Was it really a gift? Did you win something? I answered none of them. Every time I hung up, I knew she'd be on the other end somewhere, waiting for someone to hand her a detail she could twist. By the second week after Dad's party, I realized she wasn't just fishing for information. She was trying to corner me. The real estate agent I'd worked with called and said she'd been asking for copies of the transaction records. She didn't get them, but that didn't mean she'd stop. On Thursday, Dad called again. She's saying the cabin's too far for me to maintain, he said. That maybe we should sell it before it becomes a burden. I could hear the hesitation in his voice. She'd planted the seed, and now she was waiting to see if it took root. It's not a burden, I told him. It's yours. No mortgage, no debt, nothing tying it down. She knows that. He didn't argue, but I could tell he was tired of being in the middle. That was exactly what she wanted. 2 days later, I decided to take the fight out of the shadows. I called her directly. She answered on the second ring, her voice dripping with casual cheer. Well, you finally decided to talk to me. We need to meet, I said. Busy, she replied. Tomorrow. The cabin. 10 in the morning. She paused just long enough to make me certain she'd be there. Fine. The next morning, the sky was overcast, the air cool enough to carry the scent of pine down the road leading to the property. I parked out front and unlocked the door, letting the sound of the creak behind the cabin fill the silence. She arrived 15 minutes late, stepping out of her SUV in a fitted jacket and sunglasses like she was coming to an open house. Her eyes scanned the place, as though she already owned it. Nice spot, she said, walking past me into the living room. Shame it's going to be so much work for Dad. I closed the door. We're not talking about upkeep. She turned, resting her hands on the back of the couch. Then what are we talking about? You've been making calls. You've been digging. She didn't deny it. I wanted to know where you suddenly got the money to pull this off. It's not like you've ever been in a position to buy property without help. I stepped closer. I didn't need help. She smiled, but it was the kind that came before a strike. That's not what I'm hearing. The thing about my sister was she never moved without thinking 5 steps ahead, which meant she'd only push this far if she believed she had something in her pocket. What do you think you know? I asked. She tilted her head. I know you've been working with someone. I know this wasn't all your money. And I know if I keep asking the right questions, I'll find out exactly what you're hiding. I let the silence hang long enough for her to think she'd rattled me. You want the truth? Fine. Sit down. She hesitated, then took the armchair across from me. I didn't just buy the cabin, I said. I bought it from someone who owed me more than money. Someone who was willing to let it go for less than half its value in exchange for clearing a debt they couldn't afford to have on record. Her eyes narrowed. What kind of debt? The kind that doesn't get discussed at family dinners. For a moment, she said nothing. I could see the calculations running in her head, what that meant, who it could involve, what leverage it gave me. You're lying, she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. I leaned forward. You want to push this? Go ahead. Call around. Ask about the last owner. But understand this, you won't just find out who it was. You'll find out why they wanted it gone. And when you do, you'll wish you'd stayed out of it. Her fingers tightened on the armrest. So this is a threat? It's a fact, I replied. The tension sat between us like a live wire. She stood after a moment, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. Dad's going to need help out here. I'll make sure he gets it. I didn't move to stop her. She walked to the door, but paused with her hand on the knob. This isn't over. It never is, I said. After she left, I sat on the porch, watching the trees sway in the wind. She wouldn't drop it, I knew that. But now she also knew that pressing too hard could cut her in ways she didn't expect. That night, Dad called again. She says you were threatening her. I wasn't, I said. I was telling her to stop turning this into a game. She won't, he said quietly. No, I agreed. She won't. The next week, she made her move. A letter arrived at my apartment from an attorney. Her attorney, claiming the cabin had been purchased with shared family resources and should therefore be subject to joint ownership. It was ridiculous, and she knew it, but the point wasn't to win. The point was to drag me into a fight I'd have to spend time and money to get out of. I called her. You're wasting everyone's time. Am I? She said. Because once Dad starts thinking this is going to turn ugly, maybe he'll decide it's better to just sell it. That was her angle. Not to take it, but to force it out of his hands entirely. You think you can pressure me into letting it go? I said. I think you care more about Dad than you care about this place, she replied. She wasn't wrong, but she was also underestimating just how far I was willing to go to make sure she didn't get what she wanted. 2 days later, I asked Dad to meet me at the cabin. When he arrived, I handed him a new envelope, this one containing a revised deed. His eyes scanned it, confusion settling in. I added a clause. I told him, the property can't be sold without my approval. Ever. And it automatically transfers to me if anything happens to you. No one else can touch it. He hesitated. This is going to make her furious. It's going to make her relevant, I said. He signed it without another word. When my sister found out, and I knew she would, she didn't call. She showed up. No warning, no appointment. Just standing on my doorstep like she owned the building. You think you're clever, she said. I think you overplayed your hand, I replied. Her jaw tightened. This isn't finished. It is for you. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away. No parting shot, no final word. Just silence. And in that silence, I knew the fight was done. Not because she'd accepted it, but because she'd realized there was nothing left to take. The cabin stayed in Dad's name, untouched. He spent his weekends there, exactly the way he'd always imagined. My sister stayed away, at least from the property. She still circled me at family gatherings, still looking for a crack. But there was nothing for her to pry open anymore. Sometimes patience isn't about waiting quietly. Sometimes it's about holding the line until the other side has nowhere left to stand. And this time the line was mine.